10 Most Terrifying Serial Killers. When you think of psychology, the first thing that comes to mind might not be serial killers. Yet psychologists have long tried to understand why some people become serial killers. Is there a genetic component? Is the environment in which the person grows up more to blame for their behavior? Or is it a combination of factors that turns some people into terrifying killers? The serial killers discussed, though, aren't just anyone. They're some of the most horrifying individuals to ever walk the earth. Number 10. Richard Ramirez, 1960 to 2013. For more than a year during the 1980s, Richard Ramirez terrorized neighborhoods throughout Los Angeles. Nicknamed Night Stalker, Ramirez would break into homes and brutally murder his victims, sometimes raping them first.
The Night Stalker killed at least 13 times, 13 people who were awakened in the night to face death.
His victims ranged from his early 20s to a 79-year-old woman. His weapon of choice included handguns, knives, a tire iron, a machete, and even a hammer. Ramirez never expressed any remorse for his crimes. He was sentenced to death but died of lymphoma before he could be executed. Number 9. Joachim Kroll, 1933 to 1991. German serial killer Joachim Kroll murdered at least 14 people, including young children between 1955 and 1976. After strangling his victims with his bare hands, Kroll would have sex with their corpses, then cut them up in pieces to eat.
The whole thing was only discovered because Achim took a girl from the neighborhood.
Interestingly, Kroll was finally caught after a neighbor complained about a backup in the plumbing. The pipes were clogged with human remains. When Kroll was arrested, he was in the process of shimmering body parts taken from his most recent victim, a 4-year-old Marion Ketter. Number 8. H.H. Holmes, 1861 to 1896. Holmes was a con artist who moved to Chicago in 1885 and began work in a pharmacy. He built a building nearby the pharmacy that he used as his base for killing his victims, which number anywhere from 20 to 200. The height of his activity as a serial killer was during the 1893 Columbian Exposition in Chicago. The fair brought thousands of people to the city, and Holmes capitalized on all the newcomers by offering rooms in his building as accommodation for visitors. Holmes was put to death in 1896 after his conviction for murdering an associate of his, Benjamin Pitzel. Number 7. Jack the Ripper, unidentified serial killer in 1888. Jack the Ripper may be a name that everyone knows, but no one can be certain of his true identity. Whoever he or she was, Jack the Ripper was deranged. In 1888, Jack the Ripper terrorized the Whitechapel neighborhood of London by slitting the throats and abdomens of at least 5 prostitutes and leaving them for dead. Sometimes he would even remove the woman's uterus and take it as a sort of prize. It's unlikely Jack the Ripper's true identity will ever be figured out, but Ripperology, the study and analysis of the murders, has certainly inspired quite a few what-if novels and films over the years. Number 6. John Wayne Gacy, 1942 to 1994. There's deranged, and then there's the type of deranged that describes the serial killer John Wayne Gacy. He was nicknamed Killer Clown because of his job attending children's birthday parties and charitable events as Pogo the Clown. His occupation gave him easy access to potential victims. Gacy was convicted of raping, torturing, and murdering 33 teenage boys over 6 years. He would lure them to his home, kill them via either strangulation or asphyxiation, and then bury them on his property. Gacy was executed in 1994. Number 5. Albert Fish, 1870 to 1936. When a serial killer is dubbed the Brooklyn Vampire, the Moon Maniac, the Werewolf of Wisteria, the Gray Man, and the Boogeyman, it's almost certain he is thoroughly deranged.
Albert Hamilton Fish holds the distinction of being one of America's most gruesome serial killers, since he not only killed, but also ate children, cemented his place in American history as the human version of the Boogeyman.
Fish was tried and found guilty of raping, killing, and cannibalizing 3 children in the early 1900s. However, he claimed that he had murdered more than 100 children, and even boasted that he had children in every state. Especially deranged is the fact that Fish sent a letter to the mother of one of his victims, 10-year-old Grace Budd. The letter details how he had lured the little girl, strangled her, and then cut her into pieces and ate over 9 days. Number 4. Jeffrey Dahmer, 1960 to 1994. No list of the most deranged serial killers would be complete without Jeffrey Dahmer. Dahmer, known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, was ultimately convicted of murdering 17 young men over 14 years. But Dahmer didn't just murder them. He also raped, dismembered, and sometimes even ate his victims. During his trial, Dahmer admitted to drilling a hole into his victims' heads in an attempt to turn them into mindless sex slaves. Although Dahmer likely would have been executed for his crimes, he was beaten to death in prison in 1994. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. Number 3. Andrei Chikatilo, 1936 to 1994. Between 1978 and 1990, the Russian serial killer Andrei Chikatilo sexually assaulted, murdered, and mutilated more than 50 young women and children.
At first, the brutal and ritualistic nature of the killings led police to suspect a satanic cult was at work, or a group harvesting organs to sell for transplant.
Chikatilo killed his victims by stabbing and slashing them with a knife. One of the youngest was 9 years old. Chikatilo later admitted that he was only able to achieve orgasms by stabbing women, a fact which made it difficult for him to resist his strong urges to kill. Chikatilo was nicknamed the Butcher of Rostov, the Red Ripper, and the Rostov Ripper. Though he confessed to a total of 56 brutal murders, he was tried for 53, sentenced to death, and executed by the firing squad in 1994. Number 2. Harold Shipman, 1946 to 2004. Nicknamed Dr. Death, Harold Shipman is thought to be responsible for murdering 218 of his patients between 1972 and 1998. In reality, the number of people he murdered is likely much higher. As a practicing physician, Shipman had easy access to potential victims, which is why he was able to be such a prolific killer without raising suspicion. Eventually, Shipman was convicted in 2000, but only after a victim's daughter reported that he had tried to write a will for the victim that would name him as the beneficiary. He died by suicide in prison in 2004. Number 1. Ted Bundy, 1946 to 1989. You don't have to be an American or have been around in the 1970s to know the name Ted Bundy.
My name is Ted Bundy. I've never spoken to anybody about this.
Bundy is easily one of the most deranged serial killers, not to mention kidnappers, rapists, burglars, and necrophiles of all time.
Bundy admitted to killing at least 30 women, abducting, raping, and strangling them. He also revisited his crimes by going back to view the corpses he left behind, or bringing them home and continuing to assault them, sometimes sexually.
His modus operandi included kidnapping his female victims, raping them, and then dismembering them. He often kept their heads as souvenirs. Before he was executed in 1989, Bundy admitted to kidnapping and murdering 30 women, though this number is almost certainly much higher. That's all for this video. See you soon in the next video. Stay tuned.